Why does Leander, Texas exist? Located just north of Austin, Leander has a population of over 80,000 people and continues to be one of the fastest growing cities in the country. And it can trace its humble beginnings to this railroad. And I'm not talking about the modern Cap Metro Red Line, I'm talking about the original Austin and Northwestern Railroad. But before we talk about Leander's founding in 1882, there are two other important things to acknowledge. First off, this area was inhabited for thousands of years by indigenous folks before white settlers came to the area. I'm at a site that proves that, where human remains were found that date back 10 to 13,000 years. This woman is most famously known as the Leanderthal Lady, but in recent years her indigenous history has been recognized with this name, which I think is much more fitting. And moving much further forward in history, the other important thing to know is that Leander wasn't the first town founded in this immediate area. That first town was called Baghdad, and it was founded in 1854. Its cemetery, which was founded in 1857, still exists today and is part of the modern Leander city limits. But that wasn't the case in 1882, when Leander was founded because of the Austin and Northwestern Railroad. This railroad was intended to connect Austin all the way to Abilene, but it only ever made it as far out as Llano. And on its path to that city, it went through some areas that barely had anyone that lived there. But despite that, the Austin and Northwestern Railroad did not opt to go through Baghdad. Instead, the railroad was built a mile away from Baghdad, and a new town was created on the spot. The town would be named after this guy, Leander Catfish Brown, who was the board president of the Austin Northwestern Railroad at the time. And we could see exactly how that went down by looking at this Austin Daily Statesman article from June of 1882, which announced that the new town was separated into lots of land that would be for sale over a giant barbecue. And according to this article from the next day, both the selling of those lots of land and the barbecue itself were a huge success. 72 lots of land were sold for a total of $1,500, and 4 of those lots were bought by Leander Catfish Brown himself. And apparently there was a ton of food to eat at that barbecue, and a lot of bright smiles from the ladies of Leander. And pretty quickly after that, Baghdad as a town started to fade into the background as people moved to be closer to the train stop and Leander. Even the post office was moved from Baghdad to Leander the same year that Leander was founded. And for the next 100 years of Leander history, it really was a small town. It wasn't even incorporated until 1978, and as recently as 1990, only had just over 3,000 people living there. And now is probably a good time to mention my personal tie to this story. I was raised in Leander, and the cemetery that I mentioned earlier is where my dad's buried. Pretty quickly after I was born in Austin, my family moved to Leander in the mid-90s when it was still a small town. So I had a front row seat to its massive population growth, seeing it truly turn into a suburb of Austin, and really a city in its own right. And while I don't plan to move back to Leander, it was a special thing to see its growth over the years, especially when I get to see folks like Leander City Councilwoman Nicole Thompson leading the charge of the city's future, which is something I didn't have to mention at the end of this video, but Nicole's a great friend of mine. I had to give her a shout out.